Good afternoon. As the chair of the ad hoc expert group that worked on the Unesco Global Recommendation on the Ethics of AI during 2020, I want to give you a bit of background and tell you where we are. So at its 40th session in November 2019, the General Conference decided to elaborate a draft recommendation on the ethics of AI, and work of the IHEC, consisting of 24 members for each of the 6 UNESCO regions, commenced in April 2020. In May, the first draft went out for discussion and regional consultation, as well as for an online survey, and we had broad stakeholder involvement globally, across different ages, across different kinds of entities, intergovernmental entities, academia, civil society, private sector. A revised draft document presented to member states in September 2020, then based on these consultations. And since then, there has been an intergovernmental process and also a negotiation on the revised text, culminating in sessions during June 2021 to produce a final version of the recommendation for possible adoption at the next General Conference, the 31st one, at the end of 2021. Important considerations for us were, firstly, the most important one, the fact that we wanted it to be a global instrument on the ethics of AI. And then also we wanted to focus on gender equality and on protection of the environment and ecosystem. Challenges to realizing the promise of a global instrument are many. I'm going to highlight 2, and I'm only going to talk about challenges to this consideration because I don't have a lot of time. But it is necessary to at least say something about our difficulties too. So in the first place, in terms of a global instrument, reality does not in all countries or wherever AI actors are gathered necessarily reflect the goals, values, and principles mentioned in our draft document. And there are obviously political, economic, social, cultural, and academic reasons for this. And then secondly, the exclusion of low and middle income countries from most international discussion on AI and AI ethics has different kinds of impacts. Impact on the development of and trust in AI technology, and on the strength of adherence to regulation that these countries did not help formulate. And we have to take that into account and understand why this is so. So in this context, and at the moment also in AI ethics conversations, the notion of shared values versus the recognition of diversity and embracing of inclusivity and interconnectedness is really an important point. So for us, there were some basic rules of interpretation. Firstly, there cannot be indiscreteness of meaning, the threat as well as the potential benefits of AI technologies, but we focus on the threat, of course, here. The threat is real, and we need to be able to understand each other to mitigate negative impact. And therefore, we insisted that the meaning ascribed to values is articulated and communicated in a context of openness to diverse engagement and epistemic justice, such that the meaning can be heard, so that we can reflect on the formulation of specific values. How we formulate, do we formulate in respectful ways towards all cultures? I'll give you an example. The fallback to human rights vocabulary is natural in the West, in their individualistic ethical systems, but in African communitarian communities, the notion of individual rights is in fact very complex. This means that we needed to reflect on formulation and use culture as a calculus of values, an interpretation tool to measure inclusivity and to predict possible adherence. So we focus on internationally agreed on mechanisms that support internationally recognized values that reflect respect for the intrinsic worth of every person in all their diversity. Such mechanisms include, for instance, human rights instruments and standards, internationally agreed on sustainable development goals, as well as internationally agreed on environmental goals and objectives and climate change treaties. We also, however, focused on making clear the urgency of the possible negative impacts of AI on human dignity, human agency, widening inequality, education, the environment and ecosystems, culture and the arts, and the future of work. And these are human concerns. Without minimizing the importance of listening to different cultures, we are facing problems that are shared. So we focus on participation of all cultures in AI ethics regulation and of all vulnerable groups in the AI system lifecycle, and participation, not just inclusiveness. So the values and principles that we came up with, first the values. I want to say something about the last one, living in peaceful, just and interconnected societies, and you're welcome to ask me about this in the salon sessions. This was first called Living in Harmony and Peace. And it was focused on including philosophies, Eastern philosophies such as Taoism and Buddhism, and African philosophies such as Ubuntu. The wording has changed a bit during the negotiation, but I must say that there was really commitment to trying to find a middle ground. And I'm proud of the fact that we still have this value here. Here are the principles, and of course you can ask me about that, about them, anything that you need to know in the salon sessions. But then a different concern is the actionability of all of this. So to make this recommendation actionable, it at least has to be concrete enough to make an impact. It has to be firm enough to ensure adherence, and it has to be supple enough to have validity in the future. So we did this in two ways. Firstly, we created the concept of policy areas. So we identified different domains, and then we identified different policy actions that will help concretize and actionalize the recommendation in each policy area. And there are the policy areas for you. But at the same time, UNESCO recognizes that member states will be at different stages of readiness to implement this recommendation in terms of scientific, technological, economic, educational, legal, regulatory, infrastructural, societal, cultural, and other dimensions. So it is noted also that this readiness here is a dynamic status. And UNESCO really wants to support member states given this situation. And we took a lot of time to develop 5 areas in which we can give support. Firstly, in terms of developing a UNESCO methodology for ethical impact assessment. Secondly, developing a UNESCO readiness assessment methodology. Thirdly, developing a UNESCO methodology to evaluate ex ante and ex post the effectiveness and efficiency of the policies for AI ethics against defined objectives. In the 4th place, strengthening the research and evidence-based analysis of and reporting on policies regarding AI ethics. And in the last place, sharing best practices and mutual learning. Of course, there are still concerns. One remaining concern, and that came up over and over again during negotiations also, is the nature of ethics. The way in which we view AI ethics is that it is a dynamic system that can help develop and implement rights-based policy measures and legal norms by providing guidance with a view to the fast pace of technological development. All regulation must be in compliance with international law, but given the fast pace of AI ethics, of AI technologies, ethics sometimes has its ear closer to the ground than international law has, just in the sense of the time that it takes to incorporate legislation into international law. And here we saw a really important role for ethics. So we consider ethics as a dynamic basis for the normative evaluation and guidance of AI technologies. Other concerns include accountability issues, diversity in terms of vulnerable groups impacted on by AI systems. Did we, for instance, spend enough time on considering the needs of the aged, of elderly persons, of older persons? Education, the training of engineers versus AI ethics education, for instance. The issue of bias will always be with us. Negative use and increased sophistication. Did we have enough concrete attention? Did we pay enough concrete attention to specific negative uses, such as, for instance, the use of AI technologies in warfare? The concern around low and middle income countries remains, how political instability in some of these countries impact on the possibility of adherence and also on education and so on. Ecological concerns remain, labor and worker issues remain. Then, of course, the issue of shared values. How does one conceptualize it? How does one actionalize it? The transnational nature of companies that makes everything a lot harder. And then the context of profit versus human well-being within which everything that we do actually plays itself off. At Unesco, there is ongoing commitment to support member states in ensuring the positive potential of AI systems to benefit all. So thank you very much. I hope to see you in the salon sessions.